All right, y'all. So we're back with another episode for the World Builders like you, where we dive into the practice of Black feminist world building and explore how creative offers rooted in collective liberation might resource, expand, and deepen interdependent creative lives of refusal to invoke Alexis Pauline Gumbs. And this time, we're joined with a very special guest. I'm often left with more questions than answers inside my practice. So I wanted to experiment with bringing in more voices and polyphonic magic, right? My practice foremost and always is a citational one, which is why I'm so excited to be in conversation with today's culture worker, Cita School alum, and very first guest of the podcast. But before I introduce Ravon, I want to remind you, Cita School hosts a 9-week retreat helping you seed a creative offer to deepen the time, impact, income, and desire inside your practice. So feel free to download the Creative Offer Questionnaire to Oneself to reflect on what your creative offer might be. The link is in the show notes. Now, on to the show. I am overflowing with gratitude as I introduce you to the podcast's very first guest, Ravon, Ruffin, Feliz. We go way back as culture workers who crossed paths almost a decade ago in Washington, D.C. Fast forward to today, we reconnected by nerding out over Black feminism and tech, and I couldn't be more excited to introduce you to the practice of this brilliant world builder. Ravon, who goes by she, they, is a cyber anthropologist, writer, educator, and founder of Citation Studio, a Black feminist experimental thinking studio mapping the possibilities of computing, archives, and nature with, on, or at the internet. Born in Chicago, now based in the Bronx, she has worked in the arts and culture sector for 10 plus years, tending to public engagements with art, archives, and the internet, URL, and AFK. Ravon is also the steward of the Glossary for an Anti-Colonial Black Feminist Critical Media Ecology, tenderly referred to as the ABC Glossary as a shorthand. They are building the glossary inside New Terms and Conditions, a newsletter they launched in January of this year. In the preface of New Terms and Conditions, they speak clearly, stating this is an attempt to define terms like cloud, seed, garden, and data that make visible the exploitation on our land, our resources, and our communities, and to address the exploitations that are hiding in plain sight. Even more so, begin to liberate these terms from the lips of our oppressors, Ashe. By doing so, she directs our attention to bugs, streams, webs, nets, clouds, seed data, data mining, as in mineral mining, server farms, DOM trees, GitHub forks, clones, repositories, branches, Node, as in the cross-platform open source JavaScript runtime environment, but also the part of a plant stem from which one or more leaves emerge, often forming a slight swelling or knob. Java and JavaScript, as in the programming language, but also the coffee. Python, as in the programming language, but also the snake. Ruby, as in the programming language, but also the precious stone. Pearl, as in the programming language, but also the hard, glistening object produced within the soft tissue of a living shelled mollusk or another animal. And U is for user, the second glossary entry published in New Terms and Conditions. Ravon asks important questions of herself and us all. I'm now reimagining the user instead as a dreamer, she says. Who do I want to dream with this technology? Who will seed a new future based on what I create? Who do I imagine will take care of this technology? Raven, from me to you, I'm not exaggerating when I say I sleep better at night knowing you are doing your work. The weight of the internet being made on our backs feels a little lighter, and there's more room inside my imagination to dream with this technology, take care of this technology, and seed a new future based on what we create. Thank you for all the work you do in crafting language frameworks of care as a counterbalance to the colonial imagination being reinscribed in modern computing. Your practice is making being here easier. So thank you.
Diana, you did not prepare me for that introduction. You cannot do that to people.
I
Wow.
appreciate you.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you.
So can we breathe together? Can we start by breathing together?
I need to. Yeah. Please.
So let's take like just 3 deep breaths, and then I'll ask you to like paint a portrait of your sensorium for us at this very moment. All right, so let's begin. And I'm gonna do 2 more. Mm. So what's going on your end of the world? What's going on in your sensorium? Can you see, touch, feel, taste at the moment, smell?
Yeah. Thank you for that. My feet are firmly planted on the floor of my studio space, which I'm grateful for, carved out of my home. I've got my window open, smelling summer coming in. I've got birds chirping. The plants are surrounding me. The lovely orchid that's peeking into camera view. I've got my incense burning. I knew this was a special occasion that I wanted to call in all aspects of myself, every ounce of my being to be present with you. And so we are romanticizing this moment. So yeah. And I feel really grateful, really honored, a little overwhelmed by that introduction that just has me floored and emotional. Tears are already starting to creep in. But yeah, just really, really grateful to be here to just share this space with you. And it's totally different experience being on the other side of fangirling you for all these years now. And to know that my voice is now going to come out of the thing that I have been listening to incessantly
Yes.
is wild. It feels wild. So I wasn't ready for that emotion. So thank you for this honor and pleasure to be with you. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, we always regurgitating each other. You've always been present the whole time. So we are always at all times echoing each other whenever we can show up. So thank you for being here. And like speaking of that, echoing each other, I'm like looking at a stack of books. I'm looking at this tree outside my window, which saves me every spring. Like, me such a mercy. I'm like, thank goodness. I got some tea with me. So I'm feeling grounded as well. And then maybe we should also like start with some intention setting if that feels good. So my intention is to honor your practice, obviously, with our questions and attention, and together, right? Together, think through how Black feminist ecology, technology, and language might serve as tools for chiseling, hammering, dismantling, and building, right? The worlds we need in the future, we desire. So that's my intention. How does that feel? How does that sound? Do you have any intentions you want to set or call in?
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I think my intentions are to just show up honestly and fully as myself, and not with any pretense or posturing that can come sometimes when We want to show up smart
I
and show up. I'm here as much as I am so grateful for a practice that has resonated with you and other folks. Like I'm here as a learner. I'm here as someone who is
know.
experienced in this work, and that's also why I'm documenting it because I'm learning
Mhm.
alongside the folks that I want this to liberate. So yeah,
Mhm.
that's how I wanna show up and set that intention together.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. It's like, I feel like we were in the DMs, what was it, a month ago, a couple of weeks ago, talking about how bi-directional like this
Mm,
practice is, right? So speaking of like bi-directionality, non-linear time, all of that, I really want to drop into your journey of transformation. And this is
mm,
kind of like a three-part question, and like we gonna honor that we're not living in linear time, but I also feel like all of us um can point to a time in which maybe everything changed in us, like
mm,
you know what I mean, it
yeah.
like nothing could be the same after this.
Mm,
And so I want to know kind of like, I guess, part one, what's your earliest creative memory? Like, what's the
mm,
first thing you made by yourself or with others?
mm,
And then part two to this like journey of transformation question, maybe like what happened in between, right?
mm, mhm,
How has the world transformed slash changed you? And what does your like part three, what does your creative expression look like now as a result,
mm.
as a direct or indirect result, right, of that transformation?
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate that. Beautiful question. As I shared earlier, like thinking through being here today, using this as a prompt to just reflect on my own experiences in ways that I haven't gotten a chance to do. So just feeling a lot of gratitude for that as well. Um, yeah, when I think about earliest creative memory, oh yeah, I wanted to dig deep and started thinking about music in a way that I hadn't in a long time. And that doesn't even feel like something that's so urgently a part of my practice, but it's so necessary for me. And I'm such an internal dialoguer. Like that is who I am and since childhood. And so I used to I used to be part of a girl group for a minute. And so
What? Oh, I'm so happy I answered asked this question.
And so I used to write lyrics, I used to write music, and it was a part of a friendship. It was a part of my girlhood of like passing notes, of writing to each other. And so we also formed this girl group that very much, height of Destiny's Child. And so all of that is in there. And so writing music and passing around the notebook and like reflecting on the way that like that practice was a way for me to journal when I didn't even realize that's what I was doing. Like I was putting all of my angst, all of my anxiety, all of my fears, and all of my dreams in this notebook and putting it into these lyrics for us to sing together. And like, growing up as a Black queer child in the Baptist church tradition of like the chorus and the choir and like harmonies, like being so beautiful and meaningful to me. And still to this day, like just carry so much weight in like how I channel my emotions. And so just recalling the way that like I had this practice of poetry, of lyricism, of writing that I just haven't really given enough credit to how I've channeled my expression and even by myself. I watched the music video channel nonstop. Like that was what was on VH1, MTV, you name it, 90s, 2000s hits, whatever. Like I had all my go-tos. If one wasn't giving me what I needed, I switched to the other. And so I started what I can vaguely remember. I wish I still had these artifacts, but like I would create these kind of like lyric books. And so I can like almost feel the like construction paper that I would use to create these books. And I'm also going and buying my CDs and things like that. But there was so much music that I was being introduced to constantly, and so I didn't have the reference material. We didn't have Google and like all of these other technologies now to just quickly search like what are the actual lyrics, like what am I connecting to in this song? And so I would write the lyrics down to my favorite songs that would come on the music channel And I just remember, having my hole punch, which, that's on every school list. What we're using for, I have no idea, but I had my skull punch, my hole puncher. And so I would like do that, bind the book together, and just create this book with lyrics in it. That was just for me. Like, this was just like a quiet practice that I had. And so when I think about, writing lyrics and channeling my emotions and also creating this lyric book, like I just already see the remnants of like this archival practice that like has been so a part of my existence and now core to who I am in every aspect. So it's just like really funny to look back at that. And even now, like turning back to music in so many ways as someone who continues to like can have a full conversation internally, like before I've actually interacted with the person. And so music being a way for me to transform, to transport, and like channel those emotions. Like that to me, going to the edge of the cliff and being able to yell, and like scream into the void.
Oh my goodness.
Mm-hmm.
Like that makes total sense. Like that makes total sense to me. So, okay, you have like this polyphonic arty citational practice in girlhood.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So what happened
Mm-hmm.
maybe in adulthood that made you
Mm-hmm.
go, okay, Black feminism, okay,
Mm-hmm.
this like newsletter practice that you're inside of conversation with tech. What
Mm-hmm.
maybe transformed you that you can kind of point to and be like, okay, this moment changed.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I mean, speaking of just circularity, like there's so many moments I could point to.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like to like name a start, um, it feels most true of leaving home for higher education for the institution, of moving into university, moving into, years of schooling, and always carrying community with me, in a way that I realized wasn't true of everyone that I was sharing space with in the institution. It was odd that I wanted to know, like, how does this impact my people? Like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, all these words sound nice. I love the word palimpsest. That's great. But like, what are we doing for my grandmother, for my mom, for my cousins, for my people at home, so
Hello.
that we're bridging all of this work and all of this beautiful theory that we're parsing. And at that time, I was very much so thinking about museums as a container for my work, thinking about culture and representation and Black feminism being the framework for all of that. But something was happening also during this time of social media,
Mm-hmm.
of Black Twitter, of Black Lives Matter. And so there was just this really rich moment of like, being able to control the narrative, of being able to create your own space and not having to wait for the institution, wait for that organization to tell you that you are worthy, that you have value in this way, right? And so I'm seeing all of this happening, and I'm also like, whoa, there's like this like Black diasporic beautiful like magic that exists online, and like we're not talking about it in that way, of like, what does it mean when like you're on the hashtag for hashtag Black Thanksgiving, and like it's not just folks from the US, but it's Black folks in parts of Africa or the Caribbean who are all saying different things, saying things in different particularities around what they might have had on the table, about, the language you might have used, but like sharing in that same experience of like Blackness.
Mm-hmm.
And I just really wanted to like peel the layers back on that a lot more and like really sit with like, what does it mean to be connected to folks who I haven't met, and like but feel like I'm a part of something with them so deeply. And like to think about Black geographies, right? Like of that whole cultural study, critical study, of like Blackness that exists in our physical landscape, and like what happens when we take that to the digital, of mapping, of archiving, um, of placemaking and placekeeping. And so that feels like a really transformative moment of like, there's something here, there's something happening, and like, this isn't just me posting, you know? And so like that for me was like a really big start into my thinking through, I guess what would be called digital humanities, but like, you know, like what does it mean when I can post this photo on Instagram of like one of my favorite Instagram accounts at the time was like Young Thug as paintings. And so like you have a photo of Young Thug and like, you know, whatever year in the 2000s, and then juxtaposed next to this like Renaissance painting. And it's purposely of him like holding these positions and poses that mirror these images from the Renaissance era. And like, what does that do for us across time and space to be seeing those images together, to like see this Black queer representation alongside these Eurocentric kind of images? And so that has like really carried me through and thinking about kind of like radical archives of like the archive existing outside of the institution, right? Of like Facebook albums and like the photo album that's in your grandmother's home. Like
Yep.
we hold archives in so many different places, and like being able to honor that and being able to celebrate like what has already and always existed, you know, before institutions often and continue to tell us, you know, what is sanctioned, what is possible. And so that is like the real like foundation of like so much of how I think about archives and citation and really connecting back to a sense of Blackness, a sense of culture, a sense of history that is diasporic, that is rooted, but also always migratory, right? Like there's so much movement. And so just thinking about literally the flash of a tweet, like that movement of how it is moving
Right.
across those nodes, right? And connecting us to each other. Yeah, it's so influential to my practice. And I think later than wanting to understand myself, right? Of like realizing I was the person that I was trying to create for, of like, no one's talking to me about like what are my choices when it comes to technology. No one's telling me I even have options. Like I'm thinking my only option is Comcast. My only option is Apple, you know, and like what does it mean when we actually start to talk about technology, about the choices that we actually can make? And like then you start digging into, this is a whole labor issue. This is a whole environmental issue. Like, and when we talk about Black folks and brown folks and indigenous folks, the way that we are often harmed, you know, in pursuits of technological advancement, there's just so much there that like I couldn't look away from.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my goodness, there's so much. I'm like taking notes and I'm thinking about your connection to right, this musical matter of your childhood. And now I'm seeing the dots of like um this like musicality that can show up in the ways in which we're connected, this musicality that can show up in the footnotes, right? This musicality that shows up in the ways in which we share and connect online, right? So I feel like this kind of brings us to like why citational practice was really wanted to ask you about. So on the occasion of you relaunching your laboratory citation
Yeah.
studio, I wanted to ask you about the intention behind the name.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm starting to get a sense of it. I'm starting to get
Mm-hmm.
a sense of it, but why citational practice? And a follow-up, like how do you find yourself embodying citational practice in your daily life, ways of being,
Mm-hmm.
or what Catherine McKittrick calls coming to know, generously varying and shifting worlds and ideas. I just have to read this quote in
Please.
Science. She goes, so in Dear Science and Other Stories on page 5, she invites us to consider the Black method of citational practice as a way of living and an analytical frame that is curious and sustained by wonder, the desire to know. This is a method that demands openness and is unsatisfied with questions that result in descriptive data-induced answers. Black studies and anti-colonial thought offer methodological practices wherein we read, live, hear, groove, create, and write across a range of temporalities, places, texts, and ideas that build on existing liberatory practices and pursue ways of living the world that are uncomfortably generous, improvisational, and practical, and as well imprecise and unrealized. This method, or the method, is rigorous too. Wonder is study. Curiosity is attentive. Black method is therefore not continuously and absolutely undisciplined, invariably without precision, invariably undone. Black method is precise, detailed, coded, long, and forever. The practice of bringing together multiple texts, stories, songs, and places involves the difficult work of thinking and learning across many sites, and thus coming to know generously varying and shifting worlds and ideas. You too describe the ABC glossary as a way of living in the footnotes, right? And I see here, taste, smell, you thinking about all the ways in which citational practice is diasporic and wild, much like the web itself, right? So my question is, in what ways are the multiple texts, stories, songs, and places of Citation Studio already alive in how you be? And how you show up?
I had to mute myself. Yes. So good. So good. That intro in Dear Science. I have to return to that
He did
often.
something.
She really did something. It is so good. I mean, that whole text. I mean, talking about citational practice, experimental,
Yes.
all of it. Wow. Citation. It feels like a lie to pretend that like I'm coming from nowhere. It just I have to cite the folks who nourish this work, who have fed my journey in the most broadest of ways. That there is sometimes I feel like Slumdog Millionaire is the reference of like it's literally like looking at a bottle cap and bringing that back in however many years later of how I know the answer to something. And it just feels like the truest form of one, who I am in terms of just showing up as an artist and showing up as a researcher, a thinker, an anthropologist, but also a way to truly honor all that exists always, you know, of like talk about circularity of like I'm always in dialogue with the ways that, you know, my grandmother had a hand in raising me. I'm always in dialogue with, you know, the community that who has armored me to be in the spaces that weren't always for me. And I bring that with me in every space that I move into. And in starting my studio practice or in relaunching my studio practice, I really wanted to continue to honor those who live in the footnotes of my practice, but again, are always in the echoes of every word that I write. Yeah. And so it's also this urgency to always name like who is not in the room, you know. It's why I will always sing so much of my praise to you. And I don't have a problem with that. Like I think there's also a bit of the citation that is humbling, right? Of like we should really humble ourselves to who we have learned from, who has poured into us, and continue that kind of giving circle, you know, that network, that web of folks we are in relationship with, that we are in conversation and dialogue to, with, for, how at all times. And part of citation was also just born out of a practice and collaboration that was always thinking in terms of leaving home, right? Of again, having to leave home to pursue careers, to pursue degrees, and what it means to carry home with you, and not leave that knowledge, not leave that cultural wealth behind, and always be thinking about how we bring that back. And so I think about Sarah Ahmed of like citation is feminist memory. And like that is how we pay homage, you know. And to Catherine McKittrick, who I'm always in dialogue with and dreaming inside of her work. Citation is storytelling. It's it's it is the ways that we tell the truth, really. I love the way as she goes on in that intro, of talking about theory, of the way that theory is storytelling, but storytelling then also shows us the ways that like theory is a fictive practice. Like it is a way that we bring together so many different imaginaries, you know? And there's such a beautiful circularity to that of like, we are constantly creating, like we are constantly in this kind of, this wheel, this web of like bringing in so many different aspects of our history, of our culture, of our stories. And so Citation Studio is really meant to honor that. I mean, the project now, ABC Glossary, is just one aspect of how I want to live inside a Citation Studio. But, I'm so excited to be digging into the archives of who are our Black pioneers on the internet. It's so easy to point to the white men and the white women, and there's so many reasons for that in terms of who founded, quote unquote, the internet and who was a part of realizing this technology. But like, one, we know Black folks were there. We were in the rooms. We were touching this technology, but also what are the other technologies that we were creating that this is built on, right? Like when we talk about the loom, when we talk about hair braiding, right? Like there is a technology that we had already created that coding is built on top of, right? And so like really wanting to like make those things, render those things visible is like so profoundly important to me of like how we see ourselves when we talk about the internet. Like I know that there's a gap and there's a distance to how we feel able, and when I say we, Black, Brown, Indigenous folks, able to feel a sense of ownership or agency over our relationship to technology and the land, because so much has been stripped from us, because we've been distanced from thinking that we can create this kind of software and hardware. And so that's just one, another aspect of what I'm excited to build inside a Citation Studio. And I'm also thinking about Zora Neale Hurston a lot lately, a fellow Black anthropologist, writer, researcher, singer, uh, poet. The list goes on. And like to be able to turn to someone like that who, to your point in referencing Catherine McKittrick, is referencing the music, right? Is referencing the stories, is referencing the dialect, and bringing that all into one page, which was unheard of for that time. That is something I want to live inside of more as well. Of like, what would Zora Neale Hurston do with the internet? Like, like what would she make? What would that look like? Who would it be for? Like how would that transform? So yeah.
What would Zora Neale Hurston do with the internet? Like, oh, I'm gonna be thinking about that. I'm gonna be thinking about that. That is such a beautiful prompt. And I love what you invited us into around citational practice as like a way of being and remaining a learner, right? Having that disposition, like having that humble disposition of forever a learner. And then citation as storytelling, which for me is like invoking like this like sampling culture in hip hop, right? It's a song.
Absolutely.
and divination as technology, right? And
Mm.
the loom and hair braiding and thinking about African fractals, right? That book by Ron Eglash, talking about how computing didn't start with the hardware, right?
Yes, yes.
It started in these different ways, these different like relational aesthetics, really.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you, thank you, thank you for all of that. It's like I feel like this is we invoked Zora Hurston, and she's definitely a part of this next question,
Mm.
which is like, what can the glossary do? This is something I have
Mm.
been wanting to ask you and be in conversation with you about ever since you seeded the ABC glossary. So
Mm-hmm.
talk to us about the ABC glossary and your newsletter,
Yeah.
Terms and Conditions, right, which is just one node, right, in this polyphonic ecosystem of citational practice. But I just love the description on the landing page. So I have a pull quote here that I'd like to read. New Terms and Conditions is a bi-weekly study of computer terminology from hardware to software beyond the conditions of electronic colonialism toward abundant relationship between humans, technology, and nature. Each issue of NTC is thinking through an entry for ABC Glossary, a glossary for an anti-colonial Black feminist critical media ecology, or living in the footnotes, right? So can we
Mm-hmm.
think about form together? Why the glossary? Why that form, that
Mm-hmm.
vessel,
Mm-hmm.
that shape, that ground for play?
Yeah.
Recently, I was introduced to Zora Hurston's Glossary for Harlem Slang via
Mm.
its
Stop it.
book, Harlem is Nowhere, A Journey to Mecca and to the Mecca of Black America. It was published in 2011, but I want to read some terms from Hurston's glossary.
Mm-hmm.
The glossary for Harlem slang. Beating up your gums, talking to no purpose. Baluthahatchee, next station beyond hell. Conch buster, cheap liquor, also an intellectual Negro. Dark black, a casually Black person. 8 Rock, a very Black person. Every postman on his beat, kinky hair. Granny Grunt, a mythical character to whom most questions may be referred. Hauling, fleeing on foot. Sellout, run in fear. Stroll, doing something well. Function, a small, unventilated dance. Diddy wah diddy, a far place, a measure of distance. Dig, understand? I wanted to throw in function as a callback to functions in programming languages like JavaScript and Python, right? Then there's Sadia Hartman's Manual for General Housework, Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments, which you cite and see is for cloud. Hartman proceeds, manual as of pertaining to the hand or hands, the hands to be outmoded or made obsolete by the machine, of or pertaining to the mule more than the machine, worked with the hands, finished with the hands, no more than a pair of hands. That's on page 78. This is the last one. I promise you this is the last one, but I'm just like, I'm obsessed.
Go off,
I'm
please.
obsessed.
I'm just
So
gonna keep muting myself. Go ahead.
then there's the Encyclopedia for Gardening for Colored Children by Jamaica Kincaid and illustrated by Kara Walker. Kincaid recounts, I is for indigo. Indigo is a member of the pea family, also native to the tropical area of China. Its exquisite blue color used for dyeing comes from its leaves and new stems, which, when fermented, produce a substance known as indican, which then is transformed into a dye known as indigotin, hence indigo. It was introduced into the New World, as it was called, because the European conquest of the Western Hemisphere, as a cash crop, like sugar and cotton, eventually becoming an important part of the economy of France. In its time, indigo, which was grown in Haiti, produced more wealth for France than the entire East India Company did for England. And the Haitian Revolution, which freed the enslaved Africans, was so catastrophic to France's economy that it led Napoleon Bonaparte to sell Louisiana to President Thomas Jefferson. So we're clearly having fun playing with terms in this way. there's a creative curiosity at work.
Mm-hmm.
But why this format of call and response? Why
Mm-hmm.
lay out terms and definitions or terms and
Mm-hmm.
conditions in this
Mm-hmm.
way? What are we up to, right?
Mm-hmm.
So my question, finally, what can a glossary do that perhaps a
Mm-hmm.
series of essays, poems, stories, footnotes,
Yeah.
maps, paintings, and pots cannot?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. And thank you for all those citations. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm just always so overjoyed. One, I'm grateful to be Black. I'm grateful to be Black.
Yeah.
We're so inventive. Like, we create so much. And it's just so beautiful. I'm just thinking back to the Harlem slang that Zora Hurston captured. And like, there's just so much wild beauty and like being able to stake claim, I think, is
Mhm.
maybe what's resonating with me right now of like encapsulating a spirit, a framework, a culture, a community, and being able to, I mean, again, archive. It's the archive of being able to compile. Like, what does it mean when we bring all of this into one space, when we center this right in this one place, in this one area?
Mhm.
With ABC, an anti-colonial, Black feminist, critical media ecology, ABC for short. One, I mean, just the naming structure that was to play on this idea of academy, right? This idea of like these kinds of structures, of these kind of institutions of like grandeur. And so I love living in that sarcastically a lot. And so I hope to live in that more with my work. Like there's an even longer version of that of like, also it's an atlas, also it's a, like dot, dot, dot. And that's what I want it to be. It's meant to be deeply speculative and like part of making this a glossary, was very intentional of like I thought about other forms of like, okay, like how does the alphabet live when I think about words of like, could it be an encyclopedia? Could it be a dictionary? And like encyclopedia just felt like too much of, at least for me, of knowing all. Like I wasn't trying to be the exhaustive resource around a glossary for the internet or technology. And then with dictionary, there was something like too authoritative about that of like, this is the correct definition of this word. And it just felt too close for what I was trying to do in terms of glossary. One, there's something like when I imagine it, I think of it so tangibly of like reading that text, and maybe this is going back to school days of like you got your big history book, your language arts book or something, and like those bolded words that are in there that are calling your attention to move to the back of the book, the back of the text, and like
Mhm.
that layering of reference, calling you to the glossary section. And like, there's also, yes, it's defining a term, but it's also referencing back to the context of that term. And like, I love that kind of back and forth. And so the reason for, the newsletter being a way to start to call people into this practice and call attention to the glossary, it was very intentional for that to be a kind of study of, you know, I want this to be a way for me to live inside the footnotes, to live inside of the speculation of like, what could this word mean? What do I want it to mean? But I also want it to be an invitation of like, what do you want this to mean for you? Like, what new conditions can you imagine from these terms? What terms have you not given attention to that maybe you want to? And start that practice not just for myself but for those who are subscribed and following this journey that I'm on, to call them into their own reflective and meditative practice, of rethinking like what is in your local community that is technology, like who are you connected to through your technology, through your network, uh, to call in some of that terminology. And that just felt really aligned with what I ultimately want to see the glossary become. I want it to be an open access resource that is compiled with the terms that I have been studying. But also, again, still calling in that imaginative practice of I by no means am the authority of what these words can mean. Like, let's dream together of what a cloud is, you know, like what can you offer that I could not even dream of, based on your context, based on your community, based on the needs of liberatory practices that maybe I'm not touching on right now. And so leaving that room inside of the glossary for that kind of speculation and invitation for folks to think about their own practice, to address the inequities that they see. And so soon, you know, that being a resource, but also there being that component of people being able to submit a community submission form of like, what term, you know, does exist for you, and having a set of meditative exercises that allow folks to start to like live inside of that. And again, you know, like I want to be in community as I think through this and learn through this. I don't have a background in tech. I didn't go to school for any aspects of what I'm talking about, but that's the point also of we are all, you know, to bring in Melanie Hoff and that amazing quote of like, we're all already programming. You know, there should not be this dichotomy of the programmer who now gets to tell us, you know, how the technology is used, but also in you making the folder on your computer, in you moving around those files, like you are also programming, you are also creating. And so like there is that kind of back and forth, that dialogue that is happening between those of us with the soft and the hard tech of it all. And like being able to celebrate that and hold that together is like also what I'm trying to bring together through new terms and conditions and the invitation of being a part of the study. So yeah, I mean, I really hope to also have these other components of community workshops, of I'm dreaming of like walking tours right now of what does it mean to go on an internet walk in your community, to see the infrastructure and like imagine that infrastructure differently, but also something that's really interesting as I start to walk my own community here in the Bronx is that we are the lowest connected borough in New York. And so, what does it mean, actually, ironically, to walk my community and not see that infrastructure? And
Right.
so, what do I have to dream of now in place of like what doesn't exist? And so now thinking about like, you know, how do we see what's not there and create through these kind of like internet walks together as community. And so that's something I hope to build on as I build up the glossary as well.
Of course, that's what we're doing. Of course, that's what we're doing. Of course, we're speculating.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, we're seeing what's possible but may not be there, right?
Mm-hmm.
What Tina Camp says, you know, a future that doesn't exist but must,
Mm-hmm.
So, right,
Mm-hmm.
of course, that's what we're doing with the glossary, right? There's, it's like it leaves space for hacking and collaboration.
Exactly.
That
Yeah.
I love how you mentioned that it introduces like context too. There's this like
Mm-hmm.
contextual piece that's associated with it. And this feels like a beautiful segue to notes on an ecological approach,
Mm-hmm.
which is I'd love right now in this very moment to like continue gathering notes on an ecological approach. You just invoked the landscape of the Bronx, right? So this feels super appropriate. And here I'm thinking about the conversation we had at the picnic table, right?
Mm-hmm.
Outside of Pioneer Works in Brooklyn, on like the Land Back Movement meets website domains, right?
Mm-hmm.
You referenced this in your newsletter and
Mm-hmm.
glossary entry titled D is for domain. And it strikes me as like, of course, this is kind of echoing throughout your practice. Like, we can't talk about world building and technology without talking about how colonization is made possible by language, right?
Mm-hmm.
I love how you call our attention to that in your practice. Right? There are ways, there are many ways. There are written codes inside of the encrypted laws and contracts that are making violent extraction and exploitation possible. Inside and Outside the Mines of Congo. As you reference in your newsletter and glossary entry titled E is for Electronic Colonialism, as so many Black feminists have named, right? Language itself is the sometimes colonizing technology that makes so many of these systems of oppression possible. Right here, I'm thinking about Catherine Mitchell Kittrick, what she points to in Dear Science, as we talked about. Zakiya Iman Jackson illustrates in Becoming Human. Kinesia Lubrin refers to the storeroom of grammar and syntax in reference to Code Noir. What Sadia Hartman is circling in Manual for General Housework and Wayward Lives, and what Alexis Pauline Gumbs breaks open in Undrowned, right? While having to confront the casually colonizing language, cosplaying as neutral inside scientific textbooks on marine life. Speaking of Alexis Pauline Gumbs, you just wrote a newsletter titled Notes on an Ecological Approach, citing her polyphonic essay, This is What It Sounds Like, an Ecological Approach, that was published in 2010. Always right on time, right? Like these things are always right on time. So in your invitation to return, AKA your newsletter, you write, when we remember everything is connected, that we are part of a set of interdependent relations between Earth and humans, we restore our ability to future. That's that speculation piece again, right? New terms and conditions. The forthcoming ABC glossary and my practice are an invitation to restore our connections, to return to what already exists through an ecological approach. I not only reclaim my vision of a future that can and does exist, but also my responsibility to ensuring that future comes into being. So I want to be respectful of your time. I want to wind us down here, but what do you hope to break open or make newly possible, right, in your citational practice by turning our attention to the entanglement of land and language?
Yeah. Thank you. You're always invoking so much. Wow. Wow. I mean, I think in so much of what you said when you refer to Sadia Hartman's Manual for Housework, when we're talking about Alexis Pauline Gumbs, this ecological approach, like those are two texts for me that there's so much there in them not saying so much.
Right.
Like that's what broke me down when I found the Manual for Housework. I was like, wait. Like in the middle of this text, there is suddenly this small 2-3 page of over 100 pages, over 200 pages, this 2-3 pages here that somehow told me everything I needed to know about what it means for Black women to face labor injustice, to face racism, sexism, like fears of rape on the job. Like there's so much that is encapsulated in those 3 pages in her creating this entry, what she calls a dictionary entry, a manifesto of poetic utterance. And to me, when I think about those 2 texts and what I want to be doing, that those 2 texts encapsulate so much for me of I want to make possible for us to be able to really live inside of these words. I want to make possible that you don't have to understand it from one perspective. You don't have to accept what's been given from that one perspective, right? Of you have an answer for what this is. You feel it.
Exactly.
And that's where, getting back to the Black method of it all, of that's why the footnote can also be a song. That's why the footnote can also be a dance, right? Of it doesn't matter that you don't know the technical definition of what a bug is, but you've experienced nature. You've experienced a relationship to what it means to experience bugs, right? And what does it mean when we embody all of that and bring that to the conversation around our existence and as it relates to everything. And so like sometimes it's hard for me when I'm writing because it creates that, going back to language, it creates that bifurcation, those like silos of like human, nature, technology. And I'm like, but it's much more compact than that. Like I don't mean it in these kind of containers. Like I really mean when I say human, all of that. When I say technology, all of that. Like I'm talking to you through Zoom. I am wireless. Like all the connections are going somewhere, like everything leads back. It's material, like there is a wire somewhere that is making it possible for us to talk to each other right now. Like, what does it mean when we hold all of that, when we think about how we want to thrive, how we want to future? And so I really want to support like a more holistic way of futuring. And I mean, and so many people like yourself are doing this, and I'm just grateful to be in good company and like be just another node along that project, of like, how do we speak in as many languages as possible to make this possible? Like, I know this language is inaccessible. Like, my newsletter is one outlet, but I know that I need to get on the ground. Like, I know I need to be face to face, door to door in my community, right? Like, I know my people in the Bronx are not reading my newsletter. That's just facts. And that's okay. Like, that's for one audience. And like, what can we make for another audience, right? That really makes this real. Like when we talk about liberation, when we talk about futuring. And so that's where I'm like holding all of the, multidisciplinary ways of like, how do we practice this future of like, yes, it is theory, but theory is also storytelling. And storytelling is also me talking to my neighbor, and like doing all of those different levels of work, so that we're all being brought along into this future. Like working in these spaces, being in academic spaces, like it becomes so insular of like who has access, who can afford to be in this space, who can speak this language, who is privileged enough to hold these conversations. And so for me, it's really about, it's always, I mean, I think now I've spoken to it in every aspect of like, it's always about bringing it back home, right? Of like, how do I take this literally on my back like Santa Claus and take this back to the community, and make this accessible? And like, that feels like the beauty of what I feel like my gift is, of like, being an educator, being a facilitator of like, I'm learning something, I'm digesting it, I'm, making it accessible and tangible for me. And then there's that other layer that I'm excited to embark on of like, now let me turn that over once more, of like bringing that back to my people.
Right. Oh my goodness.
I know. I could talk to you forever.
I'm like, oh my gosh. I mean, it's so like what you said about like living into the words. I'm like what's echoing back is like also like a holistic way of futuring. But what came up in your response, what I think I'm going to kind of like continue carrying is like an ecological approach is an interdisciplinary approach. It's like, right. It's this multimedia approach.
Yeah.
It's like, it's honoring that, and honoring not only the land we come from, the people we come from, right? And the embodied wisdom that we come from. So my last question, and we're like, this could go on.
This could go on, okay?
Go on and
I
on.
know. You're Gemini, Steve's my Gemini rising. This could keep happening, okay?
This could keep happening. But I mean, to that most recent thread, what do we owe the archive? Right? You're someone who worked with the National Museum of African American History and Culture when it first opened, and have experience with people literally bringing their physical things in outstretched hands from their kitchens, from their attics, their sheds to preserve. I'm just imagining all the energy, care, and stories embedded in their archives, in their objects. at times the archive feels sentient, right? Like it's walking, talking, singing, and sometimes refusing as we try to reproduce it or collaborate with it in our practices. I couldn't end this conversation without asking you this question that I haven't been able to stop thinking about since embarking on my own Daily Seed zine project back in like 2021. The question is like, what do we owe the archive? If you know, what's our blood sacrifice, right? Because it feels like our entire practices are only possible because of our archive and because of who we come from. So what do we owe it? How do we honor it?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I mean, so much. But what comes to mind is care and attention. We owe it care and attention. We owe them care and attention. I mean, to your point about working at the Smithsonian African American History Museum, you have folks holding on to things in their attics already for decades. And then when they heard there was a museum for them coming, they said, I've been waiting for you to open so I could give this to you. And so it takes time, it takes care, it takes attention, because I think to your point, you know, in your question, sometimes it feels like the archive is refusing. I think sometimes that refusal isn't always, that refusal isn't always I think sometimes the intention of the archive. I think there are stories in the archive that it does want to tell us, but like they're traumatic. They're they're hidden. They're in our people's attics. They're in their basements. They're in their closets. You know, like no one's asked them the question. What was it like? Who was there? What did y'all do? You know, how did you survive? And so when I think of that question of the archive, like it really does boil down to that time, care, and attention of like, where can we, and I know I'm not always the greatest at this, of like sitting down with our elders and really asking those questions. Like they have the stories. Like I know my grandma got at least 100 newspapers stacked up somewhere, you know, like why are we collecting this? What stories are we holding on to that we don't even realize, especially when we talk about, you know, this digital era of ephemerality, of like, you know, not capturing things in the way that we used to, or just capturing them differently, I should say. But you know, there's so many stories that still want to be told. And when we talk about that kind of refusal that often exists, it often exists for Black folks. It often exists for us in the way that like our stories have not been told. Our stories are sitting somewhere collecting dust. And like, how can we be stewards of those stories? You know, how can we, you know, going back to what does it mean to have a citational practice? You know, there truly is nothing new under the sun, as my grandmother would quote from Ecclesiastes, of like, this has all been done before. And when we talk about wanting to future, it's okay to have reference material. We need reference material, actually. Like, it's actually a really beautiful thing to say, I have a great idea, and then return to a text and see that that idea exists. And now one, can see that it's possible, but two, I have help. Like I have other folks who have envisioned this. And again, this is also where it goes back to having multiple languages. Like we all have our ministries, you know, and it's like, which part of this are you able to hold? You know, like someone put it in a book and I can take this here, you know? And so I think, you know, oh wow, I just built so much on that question. But yes, the archive, time, care, attention. To realize our futures and to be able to tell those stories and practice a new kind of refusal, right?
Yeah.
Like how do we know how to refuse? How do we create a practice of refusal? Is knowing what is being kept and sometimes being kept away from us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh my goodness. I mean, this is bringing us right back to, right, this Sankofa sensibility, right?
Mm.
Going back and getting, and I love your reframe, right? Sometimes the archive isn't refusing, but maybe we're just not asking the right questions. Or
Mm.
maybe we're not
Mm.
spending enough time listening and,
Mm.
and sitting with those questions,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So thank you for that. And then, I guess to put it back to you, do you have a question for us?
Mm.
Is
Mm.
there a research question or
Yes.
creative prompt you've been circling around lately? A prompt that we
Mm.
can work with this week in our
Yeah.
journal dreams together?
Yeah. Thank you for that. I mean, I think it's that question of how do you want to return?
Mm,
How do you want to return to yourself? And I think you ask this question often, right? When you talk about desires, like how do we return to ourselves so that we can future in a way that can sustain in the face of capitalism,
mm,
And I think my footnote to that question, my addendum to that question is how do we want to web in a way, right? That brings in our bodies, that brings in the land, that connects us to each other. Um, yeah, yeah. I want us to take time to answer that question. I really do. I think so much of my last reflection in the newsletter, the notes on the ecological approach was really for that reason of like, we need those desires that you're calling us into, right? So that we can have the fortitude
mhm.
to really imagine holistically, right? Like when we cut that part of ourselves off, we're only doing a small fraction of what's possible.
Yep.
Yeah, the
Mm.
return. Yeah.
How do you want to return? How do you want to return? Thank you for that question.
Mm.
And you just had a birthday. You just had a
What a
birthday.
birthday. Yes, I did.
Juicy and appropriate. Um,
Thank you. Thank you for this gift.
again. Oh
Hmm.
no, thank you for the gift that is you in this practice, in this reflection, in this way of being, in the footnotes, living in and around the footnotes.
Thank you.
So how should we stay tuned with what's coming out of
Oh
studio?
my goodness. Thank
Any
you.
calls to action you want to invite us into? We got to talk about, like, we didn't even get to your religious studies minor, the Moody
Part
Minimalist
two. Part
YouTube
two.
channel. There's a
Part
whole bunch of
two.
stuff happening in this web. But how can the people find you and get in touch if they want to?
Yeah, I mean, I would love for folks to subscribe to the newsletter.
Mhm.
Definitely a lot of thinking and collective study is happening there. Um, New terms and conditions. You can find me at citation.studio on Instagram. Under construction, building a space, but soon we'll have an archive for the projects and the thinking and the practices. And ABC Glossary is also getting worked on, getting developed. As I mentioned, the submission form feels like the place I want to start in inviting folks into that study. And so also stay tuned for that. So yeah, if you subscribe to the newsletter and follow me on Instagram, you'll get all the invitations when the things are live.
Uh, Amazing. And I'll put all of that in the show notes.
Mm.
Raven, truly, 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 this is like the biggest honor. And I'm
Yeah.
also like, we gotta do something together. Like, we gotta actually make a call for
Please.
something together.
I would love to.
Yeah,
Literally
I
anything
feel
you
like we could do
ask,
this.
and
We
I
could do
will
this
do
for
it.
days.
We can do it. We can do it. And I want to make sure this gets recorded because I again am so honored to be here and I always appreciate the way you show up so humbly and like all of your just ability to hold space, to facilitate, to just bring all the threads together. Like I always say I'm in the Church of Ayana and will stand by that. Make me a deacon, whatever position you want me on the pulpit, I'm there.
Ah.
But I also say that because your invitation had me almost cackling because you slid into my email and you're like, oh, and then I have this podcast. And I'm like, girl, I see the podcast. I was like, this is like like Beyonce, be like, "Hi, my name is Beyonce." Yeah, I know you. I know.
Oh
So
my God.
I want that recorded because it just was such a testament to who you are and how you show up. And I'm so much in awe of you and just so much gratitude of like, you really do this, you know? And like, that's what I tell folks where I'm like, there is no aspect of that where I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds nice. But like, I would, take some of this, leave some of that, or, like, oh, sometimes it gets a little funny. No, Ayana does this. Okay. Like I've retreated and like, no issues, no questions, no qualms. Like you do this, like you live in this practice in such a way that like I'm just so grateful to like be able to live inside of that, to soak up some of that, to be in relationship with you in that way. It's just like such a tremendous honor. So thank you for everything.
Now the tears are welling up in my eyes. Thank you,
I mean
Ravon.
it.
I love you. I
Love
appreciate
you.
you. Will you do this? That's the honor of signing us off. Will you do us?
Yes. Let me take a breath. Thank you. So be it, be to it, breathe through it.